Hello and welcome to this special broadcast. What we are discussing today is the video which has gone viral about the Karnal SDM asking policemen on duty to take measures to stop protesters from crossing the barricade. There's a lot of heat that this video has generated on social media. There are demands that the officer be acted against for not doing his duty properly. But then there are some who are also suggesting that in the light of the protesters taking law in their own hand, was this the last resort that those who were trying to enforce law and order had? To debate that, I'm joined here by Mr. KBS Sidhu, retired Special Chief Secretary Punjab, recently retired. Thank you for joining us, sir. Also, former Uttar Pradesh DGP Vikram Singh ji is here. I'll just request both of you to hold on. My colleague Manoj Kumar is also with me on the broadcast. But before that, if we can just play out the video about what exactly happened in Karnal, what was the instruction that was given by the SDM of Karnal? Let's see the video first.
ड्यूटी मैजिस्ट्रेट को लिखित में बता रहा हूँ कितने लग मारा कोई डाउट कोई जाएगा इसको बीच करके सीधे उठा उठा के मारना कोई डाउट नहीं है कोई डायरेक्शन की जरूरत नहीं है क्लियर है लेकिन आपका किसी भी हालत में नहीं होने देगा हमारे पास पर्याप्त फोर्स पीछे जहाँ पे आपको खड़ा रखना है शुरू में जिस समय कोई इशू नहीं है मारोगे ना मारेगी पहला पहले ये और हम पूरी रात नहीं सोए यार 2 दिन से ड्यूटी कर रहे हैं आप तो सो के हैं थोड़ा कोई बात नहीं अभी खींच रहा है 6 घंटे ठीक है क्लियर है सर यहाँ पे यहाँ एक बंदा नहीं जाना चाहिए मेरे पास आया नहीं यार और अगर गया ना तो उसका सर फुटा होना चाहिए किसी का ठीक है क्लियर है ना आपको
That video, a lot of parts of it, which those who are criticizing the SDM find problematic. His insistence कि सर फूटा होना चाहिए अगर कोई मेरे पास आया. His insistence कि कोई doubt नहीं है, direction की जरूरत नहीं है. A lot of things there which many are finding problematic. But before I discuss the legal aspect of what happened, let me ask my colleague Manoj Kumar. मनोज जी, हरियाणा सरकार की तरफ से क्या कोई बयान आया है, क्या कोई इंडिकेशन है? मुझे मालूम है एसडीएम ने अपना वर्जन मुख्यमंत्री को और सरकार को बताया है. क्या वो वर्जन एक्सेप्टेबल है सरकार को?
देखिए अरुणिमा, हरियाणा सरकार की अगर हम बात करें तो ये जो एसडीएम है सिन्हा साहब, इनकी तरफ से जरूर संपर्क सरकार से किया गया है और सरकार ने भी इनका पक्ष जाना है. और अब से कुछ देर पहले ही हरियाणा के मुख्यमंत्री मनोहर लाल ने एक उच्च स्तरीय बैठक की है लॉ एंड ऑर्डर को लेकर चंडीगढ़ में, जिसमें डीजीपी, एडीजीपी, सीआईडी, होम सेक्रेटरी सभी मौजूद थे. और कल का जो घटनाक्रम हुआ है उसको लेकर विस्तार से चर्चा की गई है. क्या कारण बने थे, क्यों लाठीचार्ज करना पड़ा, और क्या, जैसा कि सरकार की तरफ से कहा गया कि किसानों ने पहले स्टोन पेल्टिंग की और उन्होंने घुसने की कोशिश की शहर में जहां बीजेपी का कार्यक्रम हो रहा था. तमाम चीजों पर मंथन हुआ है, लेकिन अभी तक सरकार ने इस पर कोई फैसला नहीं लिया है. एक बात. दूसरी बात यह है कि जो हरियाणा के डिप्टी सीएम हैं दुष्यंत चौटाला, उन्होंने अब से कुछ देर पहले, करीब 1 घंटे पहले, एक प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस की है चंडीगढ़ में, और उन्होंने साफ तौर पर यह कहा है कि जो आयुष सिन्हा ने बर्ताव किया है आईएएस अधिकारी ने, उससे वो बहुत दुखी हैं, ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए. और उन्होंने बिल्कुल क्लियरली कहा है, क्योंकि वो डिप्टी सीएम है, गठबंधन की सरकार है, उन्होंने कहा है कि इस अधिकारी के खिलाफ कार्रवाई होनी चाहिए और वो चाहते हैं कि इसके अधिकारी के खिलाफ सरकार कार्रवाई करे. तो हम देख सकते हैं या उम्मीद कर सकते हैं कि बहुत जल्द हरियाणा सरकार कुछ ना कुछ एक्शन जरूर इसमें लेगी, क्योंकि अब से कुछ देर पहले ही बैठक खत्म हुई है. डिप्टी सीएम ने भी कहा है, तो उसका भी दबाव जरूर मुख्यमंत्री मनोहर लाल पर होगा, लेकिन अभी तक कोई ऐसी कार्रवाई की नहीं गई है. जी,
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया मनोज हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए. मनोज कुमार there telling us that Dushyant Chautala, who is a member of the BJP alliance there in Haryana government, also the deputy chief minister, he has demanded action. However, the administration is in the wait and watch mode. But going back to my guest now, Mr. Sidhu, when you heard that instruction in that video, what are the problematic areas as far as law book goes? As an IAS officer, do you find the officer violating the rule book, violating the law book?
You see, first of all, let's be very clear that the law does provide the magistracy and the police independently under the Code of Criminal Procedure to use force. That is the word used under Section 129 and 130 of Code of Criminal Procedure to disperse what is called an unlawful assembly. So without going into the legalese of it, when 5 or more persons, they are gathered together either in violation of the prohibitory orders or use of criminal force, that is the word which is very, very persistently used, then the senior most magistrate or even a sub-inspector level officer is well within his rights to use force to disperse that unlawful assembly. Now, what's problematic with the over-enthusiastic response of the SDM is that he's kind of forcing a situation. It is for the magistrate, whether the SDM himself or his junior executive magistrates or an inspector or a sub-inspector, depending upon where the unlawful assembly is mushrooming at that particular point in time, to see what is the level of force. And it is a settled law as a part of all training, as a part of the police rules, part of the judicial precedents, that minimum force must be used. Now, whether that minimum force is just a push, whether it is a lathi, whether it is a tear gas, whether it is going to extend to use of rubber bullets and so on, or ultimately even live firing, that is something which has to be seen with reference to how the situation is developing. For instance, if it is a technically a commonly charged situation where hundreds of lives could be lost, then the magistrate on the spot can take the decision. But what essentially, to my mind, is problematic about the young IS officers' over-enthusiastic, to use an understatement, response is that he kind of foresaw a situation and he's quoting some directions which may have been sakti se aap iska deal karo, and he's kind of paraphrasing in his own way to the police people. So there is no unlawful assembly as of now, but in trying to brief them, I think he has overreached and not gone strictly by the provisions of the law dealing with the unlawful assemblies.
Right. Vikram Singh, the counter to this argument that the SDM was over enthusiastic, it's coming in from some quarters. Former OSD to the Haryana Chief Minister, for example, has put out videos which shows that it was farmers who took the law in their hands first. It was they who started clashing with the policemen on duty, and matters only deteriorated from there on. Now, this point of maintaining law and order, ultimately the accountability will be of the officials on the ground. And then we saw what happened in and around Red Fort in Delhi, when the administration spoke to the protesters for peaceful protests for a long time, but finally all hell broke loose, leading to the kind of violence and at least one death at Delhi's IPO. So is it an easy call to take for a police officer, for an SDM on duty in such a law and order situation?
Arunima ji, you have a seasoned administrator in your panel, Mr. KBS Sidhu, and he knows what he's talking about. I have seen all kinds of disturbances. You have to be absolutely focused and read faces. As they say, chehra padhne ki salahiyat hai ya nahi hai. You can see what trouble is brewing and what preparations. If their trouser pockets are swollen, rest assured they are carrying brick bats. And if they are belligerent, please be prepared and keep the gunpowder dry. It is said you should look like Vinoba Bhave, but your arrangement should be that of Napoleon. But it should never be given a challenge. You should never give the impression that you are bloodthirsty. The provisions of law are very clear. Section 46 of the CRPC, and as my learned friend said, Section 129, 130 CRPC, and also read with Section 96 up to 104 of the Indian Penal Code, right of private defense. The quantum of force is determined by the various danga drills and anti-riot drills of every state, where minimum force at non-vital parts below the waist. It is not that I use the tear gas without warning and aim it at my in between the eyebrows. Even that can be lethal, which I'm sorry to say many times we use it because we turn vindictive. This is not, we are not supposed to be vindictive. We can take a beating. We're not supposed to give a beating. Agreed. What the OSD said, that even if the farmers transgress the rule of law, it is for us in the administration to do what the law expects us to do, to use minimum force at non-vital posts. And if we are professional, which I'm sure we are, then rest assured, the smallest use of force, proper warning 3 times, बलवाइयों तुम्हारा मजमा खिलाफ कानून किया जाता है, भाग जाओ भाग जाओ भाग जाओ, वरना तुम्हारे ऊपर लाठीचार्ज किया जाएगा. 3 warnings before every stage, and I'm sure appropriate, proportionate, non-lethal alternative will see that 99% the law enforcement agencies. But if I turn to be vindictive, whimsical, knee-jerk, why did not the SDM have his police counterpart with him? The best is that I have never seen The district magistrate sits silent and the SP does the briefing, such briefings. The SDM keeps silent and the CEO does the CEO of the police does the briefing. But without the briefing, I think he transgresses the rule of law and also administration. It is better to have both the complements of the administration and then address the police. Thank you, Arunima.
Right. In this case, sirs, there was a law and order situation that was brewing, and arguments have been made in favor of the SDM that it was a pressure cooker situation. But what is also being pointed out that increasingly young officers on the ground are behaving like the colonial rulers. Let's just play out that other clip that had gone viral from Chhattisgarh, where another officer on the ground, Ranbir Sharma, was trying to implement the lockdown, the COVID lockdown. But look at the way he behaved with the public and why there is so much outrage every time young officers take matters into their hands like this. Can we just play out that Chhattisgarh video as well? Right. So you saw that video also, Mr. Sidhu, sir. This officer was trying to implement the COVID lockdown, but the way it was being implemented, you first slap the bystander who turned out to be a minor, then you throw his phone down on the ground, then you ask the policeman on duty to lodge an FIR. A lot of questions have been raised. If the training that is being given at the academy is taking into account these the kinds of transgressions that are happening, how do you tell the officers that they are public servants?
I think that is a part and parcel of the entire training that the Mussoorie Academy and the state academies are giving. Obviously, in this case, what the officer in question had was that they're trying to keep a COVID situation from turning into a contagion. And you are gentlemen, showing me a curfew pass, which perhaps is not valid. So that in a surge of anger or enthusiasm, he's thrown the mobile down. So that part is, of course, indefensible and unpardonable. And as far as violating the COVID and Epidemic Act or invoking Section 188 IPC, which is the penal provision for violating prohibitory orders, that FIR, I think, was warranted and should have been registered and duly investigated. But the question which you are raising and what is important is that when young officers with 2, 3, 4 years of service, All India Services officers, when they indulge in this type of behavior, so two issues are immediately flagged. A, is this the crop of young officers which is coming, whom the nation kind of appreciates and adulates after the civil services examination results come? There's a chosen few among lakhs appearing. And after 2 years of rigorous training, this is how they're conducting themselves. So this is not only about an individual officer, it immediately erodes the credibility of the field level administration. So therefore, I think it is exceedingly important, especially in this day and age of social media, of things being virtually telecast live, and your acts of omission and commission are captured on mobile phone cameras, that one should be exceedingly, I would say, discreet. No one is saying should not be strict. If a particular unlawful assembly has to be dispersed, then the law is there. You can arrest them, you can disperse them, and minimum force and so on and so forth. So therefore, I think time is for also the training institutions, and more importantly, the immediately senior mentors, the district magistrates and the additional district magistrates, and people from the state civil services who are promoted sometimes have a vast more experience. They among their peers should also impress upon young officers that while you do your duty, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but please be restrained in how you conduct yourself.
Right. So, final word to you, Vikram Singh sir. I know you have to leave. Final word. The question that we are asking to tackle protest, to tackle protesters, use of force. Is it a necessary evil? Should be labeled as excess, or is it the way you can tackle sometimes when protests go out of hand?
Obviously, Arunumaji, it is a surgical procedure and a painful necessity in times of need, has to be used with a lot of discretion. Mr. Sidhu has elucidated very clearly that every batch has its own loose cannon, but the percentage is less than 0.01%. But every batch is blessed with one or two loose cannons, and they cannot be our brand ambassadors. We are servants of the people. We are supposed not to be bloodthirsty, but the impact of Bollywood films like Dabangam and Singham and others have had its impact on our young officers. Unfortunately, it's not ground reality. We are supposed to abide by the rule of law, that we have to be compassionate. And if there is a need to be cruel to be kind, it has to be very proportionate on non-vital parts, and you be more sparingly. The lathi should not be shown, it should be concealed and should be brought out only when there is a requirement. Otherwise, I have never had the occasion to use a lathi or use a fire. My presence only was enough to dissuade and give the fear of God in any mouth, because they know you have a no-nonsense approach. But here, you talk like a loose cannon and do nothing and create a problem not only for yourself, but the embarrassment for the state government. Arunima.
Mr. Singh, Mr. Sidhu, appreciate your time, sirs. Thank you so much for joining us. The consensus seems to be that yes, you do require force in some law and order situations, but go by the rule book. Over enthusiasm is what some of the officers and their conducts have been labeled as by their seniors. Now, like my reporter Manoj Kumar was also saying, there are demands now that action must be taken. We'll have to wait and see if a precedent is set for cases like this, and officers in their training are encouraged to follow the law book, the rule book. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for watching.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.